Akayo'kaki took a chunk of venison out into a wild place to make an offering for the animals who can often have a very difficult time surviving in the extremely cold winter conditions. And what you're seeing right now is where he left the chunk of meat. You can see also some tracks where he placed the camera. And by the way, since it's near rush hour where I live, there'll be some machine noise in the background here. Just have to put up with that for the moment. So you can see what probably was, prior to Ryan's arrival, an undisturbed area of fresh snow. Camera's pointing approximately north-northeast, and I thought it might be interesting to share some of the commentary that we have in observing these animals. So this animal arrives, it's got the meat to its left, and it's checking out the terrain with its right eye. Another animal arrives on that bird's right. They go through some dances. Notice that the bird isn't interested until the second bird arrives. Then it begins getting some food. This kind of demonstrates a communal feeding pattern. When the bird was there by itself, it could have been taking advantage of that, but it wasn't. It waited till another bird came. Okay, so now there's been some time passed, and we've got a classic situation here of one bird feeding, one bird looking out. Here comes the first coyote. The coyote's got, let's see. Okay, so what happens right there is really important. Coyote comes in from, let's see, it's got its left eye toward the scene. It's coming in from camera right, comes in behind, doesn't approach the meat directly. Its first approach is to the tracks that lead to the meat, and the moment it gets a hint of that human scent, it bolts, right? It's having a startle reaction, an uncontrolled reaction, an instinctual reaction to that scent in Ryan's tracks. And now it's scanning the area carefully. It's recovered from the startle and testing the snow there. More snow testing. It's getting older data from under the snow, right? It's finding out about stuff that happened a little while ago. Not paying much attention to the meat. Very much attention to the terrain, almost none to the meat. This animal is skittish, it looks a little hungry, and notice that its tail, last part of its tail, is either missing some fur or it's compacted together. Animal is carefully checking the just notice the camera. That was the camera startle. And it's not really concerned about the magpies. It's just kind of doing a traditional chasing that is a sort of trigger. When it sees that behavior around the meat, it triggers an instinctual response. Here the animal has actually gone into a trance. You can tell it's frozen. This animal is skittish. There, it just woke up. All right, just realized, oh wait, I'm in the actual world here. It appears to be scanning what I'm going to guess is a tree line. And it seems to be concerned that this is a trap. It seems to have a knowledge about humans. It may have been shot in the past or have seen other coyotes shot. This animal is on threat alert. It's hyper vigilant. gets a whiff of Ryan's spoor, runs, startles again, almost runs away completely, like goes quite a distance that time. But for some reason, it's still interested in this whole situation. And it doesn't necessarily seem to be about the meat. Notice it's not looking at the meat. It's attending the magpies. It's attending the tree line. There's another small startle. Notice that each time it comes to his spoor, it usually startles a little bit less. It's getting some older data now. What's been going on around here before today. It's got a little bit of frozen drool or sweat on its jowls. It seems to be in an unusual state of consciousness, this animal. And it looks to me to be a little hungry. I'm not sure. There's some wind testing. I'm not sure, but it seems like maybe I can see a little bit of rib shadow through the fur there. By the way, you're welcome to look at this video on a larger screen. It's called Feeding Coyote and Magpie by Ryan Heavyhead, 2 words. You can just look that up on YouTube. And I encourage you to enjoy many amazing videos and educational discussions that Ryan's put together. He's got thousands of videos. They're just astonishing. The magpies, by the way, seem to be having kind of a game of this whole thing. They don't seem to really take it very seriously. They're not worried. They're aware of the camera. They're aware of the coyote's kind of concern of the camera. Ryan told me they often flew over. Here's one of them flying over near the camera now. It's kind of just showing, like, we don't care. So there's a camera here. So what? We know, Once again, this animal has gone back into a trance. The coyote is trancing out. This could indicate that it's extremely hungry. We had, a few other ideas. Possibly it was a scout. But it seems to be very concerned about the fact that a human has been here. More concerned about that than the fact that there's meat. And that's a lot of meat. That's enough meat to keep an animal alive probably at least for a week, maybe 2 or 3 animals. It barely glances at the meat, doesn't taste it, doesn't test it. Really interested in scanning the whole terrain. There's a little wind snuffing there. This animal is extremely concerned, hypervigilant. A little more ground testing. What's it going to go and check the spoor again? Looks like it might. Watching the surroundings some more, triggered by the magpie behavior. Yep, there's another sniff and startle. And triggered by the magpies. Notice it doesn't care about the meat, it's just getting triggered, right? It sees that black and white fluttering, and that causes the rapid approach with the ears back and head down. See, there's the magpie feeding, that doesn't bother it, right? It's when it sees a lot of fluttering that it gets triggered. Here it actually looks like it's relaxing a bit. The animal seems a little tired. It's blinking. It seems to be almost in a resting state. Now it's going back to vigilance. There's some ear movement on the right ear. Not so common. This animal hasn't had a lot of that going on during the encounter here. Not sure exactly what that indicates. It seems to kind of not be too sure like what else to do, like what's next. And now here we have a new magpie arriving. A little bit more triggering there. Vocalizations by the magpies. The magpies, by the way, have a very specific feeding sort of system, right? You can see the other 2 birds are not attempting much to get food, a little bit. When more birds arrive, things are different. With small numbers of birds, there's There's a particular protocol, right? This whole dance between the coyotes and the magpies, millions of generations old, highly programmed by evolution. These animals know each other intimately well. They draw each other to food. So what's going to happen in a minute is, notice how these other two magpies stand off. Okay, so now we've got a group of magpies coming. That's the end of it for the coyote. She's loping. When she gets into the distance, she's going to pause right about here. Stop, turn back, survey the scene again, as if to make sure nothing's following her. She's still surveying, and she's gone. She's going, a little tiny dot. Okay, so now we've got a little bit later, about approximately less than 10 minutes later, same scene. Notice how the magpies are feeding very differently now. They're all on the meat, very few on the periphery. They're working it out piece by piece, chunk by chunk, and here's what's going to happen. A very differently tempered creature is coming, and you'll notice the different temperament, I think, immediately. Notice how different the feeding profile is. Here we go. Boom. Right on in there. Chase the magpies out. Quick survey. Meat grab. Gone. Different tail. Different animal. Bigger animal. Drop the meat now for a quick safety survey. Anything chasing me? Anything on my tail? Everything looks pretty cool. Grab the meat. And we're out of here. At a relatively leisurely pace. Couple magpies taking off. The coyote goes off in the same direction as the previous coyote, and very different animal, right? Very different temperament. No problem with the tail. Seemed a slightly larger animal. Of course, the magpies are here cleaning up the blood. You know, they're getting at the scraps now. And that second animal came in. Everything's on its right. It's keeping everything on its right side, which is, of course, much easier to track and is the vigilance aspect. Comes in on the right, approaches the meat from behind, scares off the magpies, quickly takes a very brief look around as if it's a relatively trivial matter to survey the area, grabs the meat, goes off for a second sight check, and then is out of there. Now, do these two coyotes know each other? We don't know. It's possible. The first coyote appears to be really concerned with scouting and trying to figure out why there's meat here, right? It's obvious that the meat didn't just fall from the sky. Humans brought the meat. That much is obvious too from the tracks in the snow. So the first animal could be a scout, could be a decoy. If those two are a couple, the first animal obviously went out to really carefully survey the area, and then the second animal came in for a pickup. It's very likely these two animals are at least known to each other, but whether or not they're cooperating is unclear. The first animal is really frightened looking. It looks like it's had encounters with humans. It seems to be very concerned that there are humans. It seems to be expecting kind of terrible trouble at any moment. And frankly, it looks relieved when it's ready to go. It looks like happy to be getting out of there. Second animal doesn't seem particularly concerned, but doesn't intend to spend a lot of time on the site either. And its cursory inspection of the site seems to imply that, well, we might imagine that the first animal somehow communicated with it that there was meat here, and that the site had at least undergone one very careful, cautious check. One of the things that's interesting is that both of the animals, the magpies and the coyote, first one, produce startled responses on approach to the food. Even if you watch the first magpie approach, you'll see a couple of brief startled responses before it approaches the food. There's a couple of interesting purposes for that. One is that sudden movement should trigger interest from any nearby predators and possibly produce movement in response, which will reveal them to the bird or the coyote. So when the coyote startles like that, it's kind of giving a visual signal like, hey, look at me for a second, and then it will turn back and look and see if anything has come after it. You know, I remember as a child having a kind of a similar sort of fear where I'd get so scared I'd just start running, and then I'd look to see if anything was chasing me. Of course, in these cases, there never was, much like with this coyote. And yet, the coyote was being observed, right? Even though it's only mechanical. And when it became aware of the camera, it definitely recognized that as a human artifact and had a significant startle response to that as well. And notice what happens. The animal looks at the camera, startles, then looks at the camera again, right? Has it moved? Did it notice me? Did it see that is it coming now? That it must have noticed me when I startled. So these startle responses can be defensive, because if the animal is trying to determine if it's being observed, the startle may produce a reaction in any observing predator or human. There's a lot more to learn in this video, and by careful observation of animals and living places in general, particularly I would ask that you pay very close attention to the sidedness of animal behavior, bird behavior, predator behavior. Which sides do they approach from? Which sides do they track from? Which sides do they attack or defend from? These things all turn out to be very important because all animals are complexly lateralized in their brain hemispheres. We have a complex two-sided animal. Thanks for listening in. Hope you found something interesting in my commentary, and feel free to explore some more of Ryan's videos and/or my own.